Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Governance Live here at the Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute. It is this series of half-hour interviews that we do leading up to Governance Week 2024 as we celebrate all of our professionals who are contributing towards Governance Week this year. And as we've had in the last few days, we started this live series last week, Monday. We've had participants who would be contributing of their time and energy to Governance Week and who have so generously agreed to offer some additional amount of their time to share their thoughts with us as part of this live series leading up to the excellent week of conference. And today we have Noveck Gowandan, and actually I should correctly say it is Dr. Noveck Gowandan, who has so much to offer because I met Noveck through LinkedIn actually. And he has all these amazing thoughts and ideas with which he shares with us. And I was truly inspired to be able to communicate with him. And we are so happy that now Noveck is not just a member of CCGI, but he is also going to be contributing to Governance Week 2024. Noveck, welcome to Governance Live.
Thank you for having me. And just a little bit of history there. I think our history goes a little bit further than that, but you might not remember. Many, many moons ago, I would have graduated from CTS, and you would have been there in that very first graduation. And I remembered your face because you had this bright, beautiful smile. And I was wondering to ask Ravi, who is this? Who is this person who I've never seen at CTS? But she's up there, very prominent in the graduation ceremony. So I think we go back a little bit further than that.
Thank you. Actually, yes, I'm deeply connected with CTS College. I've been teaching there as a lecturer at the MBA level since around 2010 or so. And so which program did you do at CTS College?
I did the on University of Hertfordshire BSc in Computer Science in
The
2007.
BSc.
Yes.
Right. Okay, because around that stage, I would have met everyone who would have gone through that MBA program then. So I would have remembered you if you were one of my students. But still, I'm happy that we have that connection in common as well. I'm one of the directors at CTS College. Proud of it. All of my children have been products of CTS College because they offer so many amazing programs as well. I'm happy that we also have that in common, Noveck. But let us talk about your background a little bit since you have graduated from CTS, because you are now Dr. Noveck Gowandan with a PhD in IT governance, is it? So
Yes.
tell us a little bit about your journey there.
So I mean, I started with a really technical background. I did the undergrad in computer science, information systems. So back then, it would have been a lot of software development, a lot of web development. In 2013 or thereabouts, so that's pretty much just over 10 years ago, I decided to weigh my options and diversify my education a little bit. So I went into strategic leadership and management at the UE, where I was employed at the time and still employed at the UE as an IT officer. So I went along that path, sort of diversifying away from being a hardcore techie, more into management leadership. And it's through that program I decided afterwards that, okay, fine, maybe it's time to put on a little research hat, find something that really sparked my interest, and pursue it as a PhD. And I mean, 10 years later, well, 8 years after starting the PhD, I've finished, I've graduated, and I've learned a lot, and that's something that I really hope to share with everyone. Some very interesting findings.
Yes,
So,
congratulations.
thank you. So my PhD really was on IT governance, but I started, of course, under the umbrella of corporate governance, which IT governance was born from, after the Enron and WorldCom scandals back in many, many moons ago. But IT governance was really born out of corporate governance principles and applied to the IT sub-organization. And having that particular interest in IT governance, one of the questions, the burning questions to me at the time is, what organizational factors would impact IT governance? Like, why isn't IT governance successfully implemented across all industries, locally, regionally? There must be some barriers to IT governance, that would affect the implementation. So after a lot of reading and nailing down the areas of focus, I settled on organizational politics and organizational culture, which are two very much hidden factors in all organizations. So it's notoriously difficult to measure. But according to my research, they do have a significant impact on IT governance implementation and and by property of the inherited relationships to corporate governance and organizational change and transformation as well. So they are very interesting areas that I would say aren't a lot of focus is placed on, but they do have significant impacts on how organizations operate, both strategically and operationally.
Yes, and especially given the leaps and bounds we are seeing with organizations now, in not just in the online environment since the COVID-19 pandemic, but more so with AI and the number of organizations that are relying on the technology to help them be more efficient and competitive in that space. Having the proper governance structures to ensure that you don't end up being another Enron or will come is so critical for us. I
Yes.
thought it was really interesting. You said elements of organizational culture would have been part of your research study. Tell us a little bit about your findings with respect to was the study focused on organizations within this region?
It originally I tried to stay focused within the realm of higher education. So I looked at higher education across the Caribbean region. The challenge I was having was that not a lot of institutions were willing to be research participants. So I had to narrow my focus down to the UE5, the four campuses of the UE. And so my research primarily focused on the UE as an institution.
Okay. All right. So at least it's a good start. It then means that there's baseline data, and hopefully we can persuade other organizations to allow for research of this nature as well. Because within the region, one of the challenges we have is insufficient data that helps us to be able to make more informed decisions. So apart from the issue of IT governance itself, there's also that issue of cybersecurity as something which all organizations need to be concerned about. Have we understood that in your mind? Are you seeing the discourse happening where people are identifying the issues surrounding cybersecurity properly for organizations in the region?
So again, I'm going back a little bit to what you would have mentioned about the lack of data in the Caribbean. And there isn't a lot of research or statistics to sort of justify cybersecurity and the attacks in the region. But I do have some global numbers here that may possibly, surprise you. So in 2017, the global cybercrime costs were around 70 billion US dollars for that particular year. And it has been steadily increasing. In 2023, these costs of global cybercrime skyrocketed to over 8 trillion US dollars. And this is a Statista aggregate report where I got these statistics. Now, these costs really included both the measures to prevent as well as the response, the organizational response to cybercrime. So if we're looking at the measures to prevent, global cybersecurity spend in 2017 was 35 billion US dollars. And in 2022, it was just over 70 billion US dollars. And I got this from both Gartner Research and Statista. So that means in 2023 alone, over $7.5 trillion would have been spent on losses due to stolen money, damage or destruction of data, intellectual property theft, data breaches, business interruptions, and quite possibly the hardest one to quantify is reputational harm. And one of the points I've been trying to raise is that all of these issues fall under the oversight and accountability of the board of these organizations.
Very good. I'm glad you made that connection because I do understand the high cost involved around cybersecurity. The figures weren't really strange to me because we do have a workshop on cybersecurity, which we did one last year, and there's another that would be coming up in August, I think it is, with Ian John, who is the CEO of CyberEye. And I was sharing with him that specific data in terms of the trillions of dollars
Yes.
that is allocated, and identified due to cybersecurity loss. So let's break that down a little bit into what it means. Organizations, I think, are grappling with, yes, there's a high cost involved if we we encounter ransomware, if there's an attack on the organizations. But I don't know that they actually have ways to properly identify the probability of the occurrence happening to them, and therefore the spend that is required to prevent such an attack. And that has been one of the common concerns, not just within small island states like ours in the Caribbean, but I've seen that across the globe. When you're dealing with the SMEs in particular, the cost it is to be able to prevent an attack, the amount of infrastructure that you have to put in place. And along with that high cost is the cost of training and putting systems for employees, because one of the biggest vulnerabilities apparently would be employees who click on links which they ought not to, and allow a backroom entry for a likely attack. So is there a likelihood of being able to develop a common front where organizations can collaborate to help manage this cost so that you can have a shared response to dealing with cybersecurity?
That's a very interesting question, but I just want to pivot a little bit because in the cybersecurity community, there's this expression, not if, but when. So I think it's just each company, each organization that operates in the global market, there's a countdown timer associated with that particular organization as to when an attack would be coming. And in the Caribbean region alone, there were hundreds of billions of cyber attacks in the last year alone. And I do have some data. The top 10 industries or sectors would be manufacturing, finance and insurance, professional business and consumer services, energy, wholesale and retail, healthcare, government, transportation, education, and media and slash telecom, right? So I've basically just painted every single company that is in the CCGI as potential targets by the very nature of the cyber attacks statistically, and the fact that it's just a matter of when they would become targets.
That is a sad reality.
It is.
It is, and so we do know, for instance, the attack that would have occurred at TSTT. We
Right.
know some time ago the attack that would have occurred at Massey. We also know the attack that would have occurred with the Northwest Regional Health Authority some years even prior to that. So it shouldn't surprise me then what you are saying in terms of, one, it's not just if, but when. And two, the fact that there have been so many attacks in organizations in the Caribbean region. So fortunately for us, we have not had the extent of attack which had occurred with Costa Rica.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, where it was the entire government system had been shut down and trying to deal with this. And I think it's because Costa Rica itself has been one of those countries that was more advanced in terms of the use of technology. So I guess they were ripe for an attack because they are what we would call the early movers who would have, been trying to introduce technology throughout all of their systems without having the maturity to, first of all, understand their susceptibility to attacks. So What are some of those lessons we can learn from that?
So the interesting thing about Costa Rica is that, traditionally, when you think of cybersecurity and cyber attacks, you really isolate the discourse around privately owned companies, public sector sort of enterprises. But this Costa Rica case was actually a state-to-state attack because the group that attacked Costa Rican government was a Russian cyber criminal group called Conti with supposed state ties. Now, the state ties are
Right,
very
so I would
difficult
say I
to
would say supposed as well. I will not accept that it was a country to country attack. I don't believe in those generalizations that seem to happen with respect to countries. We don't know. It is
prove.
supported by the Russian government,
So they
but
are
I would
supposed.
accept that it would have been a group that originated from Russia. That
Yeah,
is a highly specialized group that, one need to be very wary of.
correct. So the scope of impact was so significant. I mean, I'm looking at, I think, the Ministry of Finance, Science and Innovation, the telecom industry, the Met industry, Social Security Fund, Labor and Social Services, as well as their municipal electricity. And this was a sustained attack for weeks that
Mhm.
cost them an estimated 30 million US dollars per day of the attack. And I believe the ransomware group, the hacking group, their initial demand was 10 million or 20 million dollars. But the total cost of this attack came up to the hundreds of millions of dollars because of the length of time that it took for Costa Rica to sort of recover from the attack.
Mhm. Now, Novak, I know we want to talk about governance, but I can't help it. If you don't mind, indulge me a little bit and let's talk a little bit about geopolitics. Because in reality, when you consider the way in which the world is evolving, and I remember, I think it was 2 years ago, we had a really good presentation from a young man out of Guyana, Richard Leo. He was sharing with us the story in is it Estonia?
Yeah, I remember the
You know,
Estonian.
that right, that country which is held up as here's the example of a country that's been able to build its competitiveness because it has transformed its entire system, its whole economy into being a very digital.
So
It's
the
what
Estonian.
we will aspire to, but then you have this kind of vulnerability that you could end up facing, like what Costa Rica did.
So Estonia had eventually positioned itself as a technology hub for that part of Europe. A lot of the data and communications were flowing through Estonia. And there was a political situation, I can't even remember which year, but it was at 2007 maybe, where basically some Russian hackers didn't necessarily agree with something that Estonia was doing. And their attack basically wiped Estonia off the digital map. They wiped them off the internet for a sustained period of time. So, uh, uh, from the rest of the world's perspective, digitally, Estonia did not exist while that attack was happening. It was a complete and total blackout of the Estonia's digital infrastructure.
Mhm. Which would have been devastating for their economy, I would imagine.
Absolutely, because they were so adequately positioned in terms of their technological capability and the data flows that were happening through the country at that time.
Mhm. And do you know what is the situation today? Like, have they gone back to being a digital economy?
They have rebounded, I believe. They do have a bit more strict measures in terms of their cybersecurity, their national cybersecurity policy. Um, but yeah, they have rebounded. They have rebounded. So it's not a matter of if you get that level of attack or all hope is lost. It's a matter of putting policies, procedures, and investments in place to sort of mitigate the extent to which these attacks could impact infrastructure. So it sort of ties into another organizational concept, business continuity and disaster recovery.
Mhm.
That is another area of interest that I have certified in. And the difference between business continuity and disaster recovery is that business continuity would allow a certain degree of the business to actually continue operating without interruption. So, for example, if there's a situation, there's an incident, there's an attack, whether it's a cyber attack, it could be a physical attack, it could be natural disaster, having an appropriate business continuity plan would mean that the business would be able to function at a minimum agreed percentage. So 25% of the business could continue, as opposed to disaster recovery, where something happens, productivity hits zero and stays at zero until different policies, different procedures kick in to bring productivity and operations back up. So you always aim to have a continuity plan is preferred rather than a disaster recovery plan.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Very good. Yes. Important for us to take note of, because within the region here, there are countries that are making strides in this direction and wanting to embrace the technology more. I think in the Eastern Caribbean, there's been huge advances made, and I'm waiting to actually get someone from St. Kitts and Nevis to be able to share on the experiences that they've had to, because I think they have a fully online um banking system and some other things, as well as here in Trinidad and Tobago. The not just the Ministry of uh, digital transformation, but the International Financial Center, I think it is, has this mandate that they're trying to move Trinidad and Tobago to a cashless society. So you're looking at the adoption of technology in everyday life for people. And this does exist already. We see it's a huge thing in China. Like, people don't even have credit cards there. Everybody make their payments using their phones. India is moving in the same direction. So if this is what organizations need to now contend with, because you have to put systems in place to be able to move along with the direction in which the country is doing, it means bringing it home to board level. Every organization need to understand their vulnerabilities as they make changes to their systems to be able to accommodate this new direction with the technology. So then let's bring that our third area of interest, which you have, which is board diversity.
Right. So one of the questions that I would ask, or I would challenge listeners, audience, the members of Caribbean Corporate Governance Institute, does your board have the diversity to bring this level of insight and to disrupt conventional thinking to these external forces? Now, the reason I'm asking about diversity is because diversity is a very broad topic. So at the board level, is diversity defined in your organization's bylaws? How is it defined? So traditional views on diversity would focus on some demographics, age, race, gender, education, qualifications. Um, but the International Corporate Governance Network and the London School of Economics, suggest a more expanded, modernized view of diversity to include not only the experience that you bring or that you have, the skills and perspectives that you also bring, which is sort of very difficult to capture in a resume or a CV. So the diversity of the board might require more than just evaluating candidates on paper. It may go be another step beyond into having them involved in sort of advisory committee levels, serving in a pre-board capacity. So evaluating candidates for suitability of fit in the board. So it may require some shifting into governance structures to allow for participation in board level activities by non-board members. But of course, with board members having the seniority and oversight. So the concept of an advisory committee with both board members and external potential candidates and consultants is a relatively developing area, I think, as it pertains to modern diversity of board.
Actually, I quite like that suggestion you have made, which is, so boards may not yet be ready to say, okay, let's revise our whole composition and ensure that we have an individual with the capacity to be able to guide the direction of the organization with respect to technology and cybersecurity. But you can have a small advisory group where you may have consultants, which would include your senior IT persons, who can assess the risks and bring that information to the board, so the board can be more informed in its decision making.
Yep, absolutely. Because at the end of the day, the board is responsible for protecting shareholder interests. They have oversight of management and direction of the organization, and ultimately the board is accountable for legal and regulatory compliance. So as it pertains to cybersecurity, the board does have oversight of cybersecurity risks. And if they're not capable of having that conversation and they're relying on the executive side to dominate that conversation and steer them. And I would draw reference to the TSCT's case where, there was a clear misalignment between the board and the executive, because as I understand it, based on my, listening to the GSC interview, they did approve the purchase of different, equipment and platforms and software, but it wasn't implemented properly. So that was, in my opinion, that was an IT governance red flag. So again, one of the board's responsibilities, setting the tone at the very, very top, where they are prioritizing their cybersecurity posture for the executive to sort of run with and set expectations for the management to build that culture of cybersecurity. And you would have alluded to that. A lot of the exposure or attack vectors in organizations are the people in the seats sitting behind the workstations. That is the primary attack vector for ransomware. Someone puts a USB or they download an attachment, and that's it. This thing would become part of the network and spread and cause a lot of chaos. So, I mean, the board's responsibility goes beyond just the oversight and the setting the tone. Again, they would be responsible for the governance framework, whether that is an IT governance framework or a cybersecurity governance framework. And what I think I've observed, and this is just general observations, I haven't gone and interviewed companies. A lot of these companies sort of pick and choose elements of different frameworks that's convenient to them. Now, I understand that, complexity, cost would be factors, but one of the downsides to this approach is that it's very difficult to measure how effective your approach really is. And that is one of the gaps that I am seeing with boards. In the TSCT case, for example, if there was an adopted IT governance or cybersecurity framework that they were periodically reviewing for compliance or maturity or success factors, they would have been able to catch some of these gaps. I mean, and there were a lot of gaps that I saw flagged, in my opinion, in a TSCT scenario.
And you were actually walking into an area too, which is so important for us to understand for board members. The fact that the level competence that is required of a director is you can't just agree and accept to sit on a board if you're not going to invest the time to understand the inner workings of those organizations that you have oversight of, so that you yourself can contribute that knowledge and skill to help in closing some of those gaps. And so the importance of board education, directors themselves understanding their role and function sufficiently that they take the time to invest their knowledge and understanding, not just of the external environment facing that organization, but the SWOT, the inner strength that help them to be able to contribute to the success of that organization.
And pulling back this discussion again into the diversity part, it's very interesting that you raise that point on education, because I was looking at a Forbes article where they listed some challenges to board diversity. The top three they listed were lack of turnover, deficient recruitment policies and procedures, recruitment meaning recruitment of the board, as well as, and this one stood out in particular, a lack of annual evaluation of board members. So board members are nominated to serve, but they aren't necessarily evaluated on their performance. And they did suggest, Forbes did suggest some strategies to sort of strengthen the board diversity, where you would assess the current state and composition of the board, identify gaps based on whatever metrics of whether it's internal metrics and external forces. And in this case, we could consider, like cybersecurity or cybercrime as an external force, and remediate based on these gaps. They also suggested something like a board refreshment plan with actual policies that would address things like term limits, mandatory retirement ages, which I think is fairly common already in some of the boards that I've seen here. But also, this one stood out, peer assessments at the board level to replace under-engaged members. So the board basically reviewing themselves and they
Yeah.
would be able to sort of, I don't want to use the term weed out, but there may be incompatibility with the current direction. So yes, they may have had tremendous value 2, 3 years ago. They may have tremendous value in the next 3 years, but right now, they may need a different board to serve the current short to medium term need. And these peer assessments will sort of help with that refreshment plan. And
Yes.
Forbes also sort of suggested the fact that governance structures should be modified to allow the use of advisory boards that could focus on specific issues and initiatives. So that, again, what we discussed, where the current board members would sort of sit in a smaller advisory capacity with consultants and experts and potential board members to sort of address a particular need. So it is in the what I would call the meta discourse. So at the very high level in theory, these things are coming out. I don't know how much implementation is taking place though.
I think within most organizations, what we may be seeing more are board committees where they invite these external parties to be part of the committee that would assess what's happening within the organization and so make a contribution in that way. But especially when it comes to technology, I like the suggestion of a board advisory team.
Yeah.
Because here is a very specialist kind of knowledge that is going to truly help the organization prepare for not if, but when.
Yep, absolutely. And that's the thing. Um, the fact that board members could receive education in cybersecurity, they could get some what I would call some superficial knowledge, so they could understand the language. But something as complex as cybersecurity and at a very high level, not even operational cybersecurity, because a board member doesn't need to know how to configure a firewall or what hardware devices they need to implement on a network. But the board needs to have a much more high level understanding of the policies, the regulatory frameworks, um, what what they need to implement at the organizational level to protect it. So it's a very high level discussion that I don't think you can train in a very short space of time. So that's where, having that external expertise advising the board is a really good idea.
Yes, especially because I don't know that the regulatory systems as yet are truly mature enough in the region to deal with the likelihood of the kinds of challenges that would face an organization if there is an attack. So it
So
has to be that the organization is being a lot more proactive in
yes.
engaging. What is our culture? What is the direction we're going? How much are we spending? And, what is the likelihood of impact? And therefore, how we protect to mitigate that.
And I think I've heard this used in more than one informal discussion, of course. So the lack of the appropriate legislation or the legislative framework isn't an excuse. Because, for example, we operate in the Caribbean space, but we also operate globally. So if we look at Jamaica's data protection legislation, it's pretty much something we should have been 5 years ago in Trinidad and Tobago. But it's really impressive, and they are going in headfirst into the regulatory framework, and companies, believe me, they have to step up to the plate for compliance. So the lack of the national level legislation, I don't think it's a cop out that I've seen some companies use. But once we're operating in a global space, we sort of need to just work with a baseline.
And I'm quite happy with what you have mentioned about Jamaica. At CCGI, we really try to learn from within the region, bring persons closer together so that we don't have to all go through the same pain in the journey, before we get there. And Jamaica has been pretty progressive with its governance as well. We are
Yes.
blessed to have on our board Camille Facey, who is with the private sector organization of Jamaica and who shares with us the fact that this data protection legislation that's happening there and how seriously they do take it. So it's even guiding us within CCGI, how we do things and how we operate. So as a matter of fact, for our own AGM recently, when we did a review of our board composition and look at the competence of persons on the board as we were looking for new members, we added that specific area of technology and governance with cybersecurity and stuff. And I'm so pleased to share. Most persons may know by now that Ian John is joining, well, has joined our board because the AGM has recently passed. And so I'm sure he is going to be able to bring that level of contribution to the board discussions as well. But it's
Absolutely.
something we do need to encourage for all organizations because it is, just a facet of our modern life now.
Yeah. So that's the thing, right? Technology has become so ubiquitous into how we live and how we work, how we learn. So I don't think it's a cookie cutter approach that every single company with a board needs to have IT. So I think it's a matter of understanding what proportion of your annual budget is spent on technology, how much reliant is your organization on technology, and on the data. So if you have a lot of customer data in-house, uh,
How you protect it.
exactly, because in the case of TSCT, um, if you go by media reports, no data, no customer data was out until cybersecurity people started saying, well, we're seeing things out on the dark web. And then, the cookie sort of crumbled. And it ties in again to sort of the board's approach to communication.
Mhm.
And the companies, even though that there isn't national legislation yet on disclosure of cyber attacks, so that I would suggest that at a national level, there should be disclosure, mandatory disclosure. If a company is attacked, they need to report a third-party body, whether it's the TT CERT, for example. Okay, we had this particular exposure. Uh, Customer records were released on the web, so they could quantify exactly what the exposure was, what the impact is, and mitigate it through communication, engagement, reaching out to these people. This model is very popular in North America. You can't escape cyber attacks. It's almost impossible unless you have a company that doesn't have any technology. You pull the plug, you're basically Amish. So it is impossible, to avoid a cyber attack. It's just a matter of having the proper structures in place at the organizational level to deal with the fallout, but also importantly, to try to prevent it as much as possible. So, strategic purchasing and having the right structures in place, having the right people in place, having the right educational engagement in place for the people in the company. So I don't think it's a cookie cutter approach. I think, each organization needs to take stock and come up with this formula.
Mhm.
What is the likelihood and what is the impact of a cyber attack? So, I mean, if it's negligible or insignificant, then you probably don't need to make a really huge quantum of investment. But again, it sort of boils down to the bread and butter of the company and the customer data that they have in-house.
That third element you mentioned earlier, their reputation, you
Of
know.
course, I mean, and it's how can you measure a reputational hit?
Mhm.
I don't even know if there's a framework where you can actually quantify reputational hit into the bottom line. I think it's sort of like a double, slight, medium, or heavy in terms of reputational hit, right?
Yes,
So it's very hard to quantify, but it could be so severe because I
yes.
mean, that TSCT case where they said no customer data was leaked. And then people's I think I saw driver's permits, I saw birth papers, I saw some really questionable stuff with potential impact of identity theft.
Yeah.
Uh,
So serious adverse impact
Absolutely,
individuals as a result,
absolutely.
which can happen. Noveck, has been so great talking to you. We have long past gone the half hour time that we normally have for this interview, but I really have enjoyed it. We have covered so much in this short time, and I'm so happy to have you as part of our CCGI family now, because I think this is the kind of conversation we want to encourage. I'm happy that we've been able to really tag this to board responsibility for directors to understand that they have a very important role to play and not just say, well, we have an IT manager and therefore he will take charge of what needs to happen in the organization.
I'm glad to be here, and I'm glad to be part of these discussions. It's so interesting that I had to tie technical undergraduate degree and then sort of masters in leadership and management, but really getting into the meat of governance is where I sort of, brought all these things together and I was like, wow, okay, that a lot of the last 15 years of my education started making sense. All these dots were connected. So really, I'm happy to be part of this space and having these conversations.
Great. So I'm going to encourage persons, if you have not yet registered for Governance Week, it's not too late because we are fully online. You are going to be able to simply log in from your comfort space, whether it's your home or your office, because this Sunday, in fact, is our opening ceremony with Professor John Elkington. And I'm so excited. I can't wait to hear from Professor Elkington talk about regenerative capitalism and how we focus on social impact, how we focus on environmental impact. And a lot of what Noveck and I have discussed today relates to that social impact. How do we protect people? How do we protect their livelihood? Because if the organization fails, now so many people can be adversely impacted as well. So as we bring this interview live to a close, I want to also thank our sponsors for Governance Week. We have two gold sponsors, First Citizens Bank and Massey Group, and we have 5 bronze sponsors this year, Angostura Limited, Republic Bank, the National Gas Company of Trinidad and Tobago, PwC, and G.A. Rowe and Sons from Belize. They have contributed significantly to us being able to do so much more for this week in preparation for bringing together over 50 speakers throughout the Caribbean region who would be sharing on their ideas and their experiences and discussing really how can we improve our governance practices so we can have better run organizations, we can have better corporate cultures, and ultimately better quality lives for our citizens. Noveck, thank you so much for joining me. I'm excited to hear you for our panel discussion when you are joining us for Governance Week as well, as I'm sure a lot of the other persons who would be listening to this interview.
Thanks for
So,
having me. Looking forward to that panel.
yes. All right.